Hey Shankar, welcome to Startup Project.
Thanks for having me here.
So, on the podcast, we like to feature interesting companies that are, solving problems, that are solving big problems, and in different interesting sectors. And you're obviously, I think, in two intersecting sectors. One is security, and one is Internet of Things. And I think it would be a great, useful session for our audience to talk about what problems you're solving, and I think it will make for a great conversation. So thanks for coming on the show. Just to level set for the audience, can you give a little bit of introduction about yourself and your career till now?
Yeah, no, thanks, Raj, again for having me here. So I'm Shankar. I started Asimily a few years ago. And just as a context, Asimily is focused on helping provide visibility and security for medical, IoT, and OT devices. So we work across verticals like healthcare, smart cities, universities, manufacturing, and so on. Healthcare being a prime vertical where we started the company from, right? And then we have expanded to other verticals. Prior to Asimily, I used to run the IoT business at Symantec, where I worked for a few years. That's where I got exposed to IoT. That's how the journey started. And what is interesting is before I even started the business, I actually did a full strategy project for Symantec. So I was in the corp dev and biz dev, where IoT was the focus for Symantec on what should the focus for, how should Symantec expand into the IoT vertical and what it should do. So my journey in IoT has been going on, I know, for 13, 14 years now. First, yeah, as like just a strategy project, and then that went into a couple of other things, and that started with the business that Semantic started and asked me to run. That grew, and then I reached a point where I wanted to start Assembly and so on. And then prior to that, I have a product and engineering background. I built the iPhone 3G modem many years ago. Then I built some of the early chipsets in Qualcomm, some of the algorithms around that. So I've been mostly on the product and engineering side, and that's how my journey started. I like this space where I am in because there's a lot of innovation possible, which is what something we have driven. And so it aligns with some of my previous experiences. And in fact, very well aligns with everything I have done so far to lead me here.
So to just go back a little bit, what was the idea when you were first thinking about starting Asimily, and like what was that forcing factor, and what was that opportunity, that big problem that you saw that you were trying to solve?
Yeah. So when I was in Semantic, I saw the healthcare. So the opportunity, the idea initially was focused on healthcare. And so that's where we did a lot of work for many years. And the big problem then was, when you look at healthcare, it's a very complex environment. Healthcare is a very heterogeneous, complex environment. And I call healthcare a system of systems because it's not just, what's happening inside the organization. It's the suppliers, it's the vendors, and it is the one environment that singularly contains all kinds of devices, medical devices, IoT devices, OT devices. I don't think of any other environment which has everything. And so in that kind of environment, how do you really provide visibility? How do you provide vulnerability management? How do you provide detection? How do you provide like all kinds of operational metrics? And in an environment which is very constrained, which is very fairly regulated, and where there are severe patient impacts if you get it wrong. It is the most challenging environment I know among all verticals. And I saw the space and I said, this is a big area. But when I saw a couple of players in the space, I thought, okay, they're taking a very IT approach to the problem, but has to be a completely different approach, bottoms up, to solve for these unique devices, medical, IoT, OT devices in the healthcare environment. And said, okay, we'll go solve this problem in healthcare. We'll do it well. We can do it as better than anybody else. And that's how the company began. And Symantec wasn't as interested then in going after this problem. And I said, okay, if they're not going to do it, I'll do it. And that's how Asimily was born.
So today, what does Assembly, how does Assembly help its customers? Like, is the product primarily security based? And one of the problems in healthcare is it's such a interesting space in terms of software, right? So how do you connect the hardware monitoring to the existing software that is being used in healthcare?
Yeah, so our system, whether it's healthcare or like we have some work with cities now, and then we are working with universities, wherever it is, manufacturing as well. The principle is the same of our system, but we have these, and healthcare, of course, we have done a ton of work, whether it's in US, international, so on, where what we do is we put our hardware in, we have a hardware appliance that we put inside the environment that connects to the network. It collects data. and then using that data, and then it extracts data, and then we extract the device related data. So we can't remember in healthcare, because of HIPAA regulations or GDPR or any other regulation, you cannot transmit patient information outside. There's a lot of restrictions around that. So we transmit device related information to a cloud, or we also have an on-premise version we can do, and there the data gets processed. And it's not just cybersecurity. We do provide visibility. We do provide operational metrics. We are adding some new capabilities which go beyond cybersecurity as well, which is coming in the next couple of months, which is much deeper. And then the data we collect, we then integrate with other systems. So that's how we operate with the rest of the environment. So we have APIs with a lot of systems, whether it is, their configuration management systems, their CMDBs, their, asset management systems, or their vulnerability scanners, whatever it might be, SIMs, NATs, firewalls, you name it, it's all there. And so our system does a ton of work by itself, but we interoperate with other systems in the environment. And so it becomes an integrated view for the health system, or for the city, or for the manufacturing plant, whatever it might be. It becomes an integrated view. And we provide a high level of granularity of data and visibility, and a very deep capability around vulnerability management and incident response, which then improves their overall posture, whether it's visibility or security as well, and improves the other systems as well, because those other systems don't have the context of these kind of devices. So it enriches the overall environment beyond just what we provide to the customer.
So you as Asimily, you mentioned you have a hardware product which collects data from rest of the devices. How are you interacting with the rest of the devices? Is it because you're interacting with the firmware on the other hardware, or are you?
Yeah. So just to be clear, we are not necessarily, we are a software company. The hardware we buy is just a commodity. So we can put our collector as a virtual machine in their environment as well. But this is purely network data that we are collecting. We have other mechanisms. We have the ability to collect manufacturer documents and so on in the back end. We have some other non-network mechanisms. But the one that I'm talking about is really what we call passive, where the data is fed from the network side into our box. And so we don't have to interact with the hardware, because we're not necessarily interrogating these devices, because at least for medical devices, you cannot interrogate them. It's very risky. For certain kinds of IoT devices, you can interrogate them. And then for certain kinds of OT devices, you can interrogate them as well. Because for OT devices, there are ways to do it, but you mostly are not interrogating. You're getting the data from these devices on the network. And then based on the data that's fed from the network, you are acting on them. So you're not necessarily interacting with the firmware or the hardware.
I mean, healthcare, I feel like, is notorious for security attacks, or in general, like, are prone for hacking. And you sort of hear pretty often that some healthcare organization has been hacked, and someone is asking ransom for all the data to be unlocked. Like, so do you see that as a common pattern, and that's what you're helping solve in a way? Or are these or I'm in a different way to ask the same thing is, what types of issues are you solving the customers' problem?
Yeah, so look, I think cybersecurity is a multifaceted problem, right? There's no one silver bullet, but everything adds a facet. So our focus is on this IoT, OT devices in the environment, which if we are not implementing, then it's left open. And ransomware attacks have become a lot more common, because health data is so much more costly than credit card data. I think it's 100x or 1000x more than a credit card data in cost. So because of that, this is here to stay. Ransomware attacks in healthcare will happen. And so helping making sure that you secure all these other devices is one big step towards preventing and protecting yourself from ransomware attacks. That's point number one, right? So we are one piece in the puzzle, one big piece in the puzzle, where if you're a hospital and you're saying, how do I secure ransomware attacks? Okay, I have my firewall for my IT systems, I have my DLP, I have my email gateway. But what about my medical IoT, OT devices? Because two problems. One is, what if they're connecting externally? How do I protect against that? Second, even if they're connecting internally, how do I protect them against my internal threats? Because you have to assume that some threats will pass your perimeter and get inside your network. And when they get inside the network, how do you protect their devices? First, you know what the devices are. Do you know where the attacks can come from? We do a ton of work around attack analysis, where the attacks can come from. Do you know what are the ways in which the vulnerability IoT, medical IoT, OT devices will be taken advantage of? Do you know, like, what kind of lateral movement could happen in the network? Or do you know when it is happening in the network? Are you going to be able to collect data for forensic analysis? All of this is something we help solve for these kind of devices. And this in turn really helps you protect against ransomware attacks, because there's a big percentage of the network. Remember, you're a hospital, medical IoT, OT are the core bread and butter of your operation. And so protecting the core heart of the system is what we are doing. And same with the city. I mean, if your traffic processing is not all failing, then what use is the city? Like, you can't be sitting at a traffic light and saying nothing is working. Imagine no traffic light in the city is working. How much chaos would that create? So protecting the core of the system or the organization is something we are doing. And that's how we are protecting the organization from ransomware attacks. That doesn't preclude the need for an email gateway or a firewall. Those are still required on the IT side, but we are the big piece on the medical IoT OT side, protecting against that piece from ransomware attack.
Yeah, unfortunately, security is not just, cannot be solved with just one tool or one approach, right? You sort of have to protect yourself 360 degrees. So you brought up smart cities. I feel like we've heard this phase of smart cities and we've passed the hype cycle. From your observation, what does it mean today as to be a smart city, and where does Asimily fit in that picture?
Yeah. So I'll rephrase the word smart cities, because the word smart cities has been used so many times in the last 20 years. Every city will be so smart. You will walk around, the traffic signals will just operate, like the parking lots will just maybe magically tell you where it is. All kinds of things have been thrown around. I think the concept of smart cities is much more simpler than that. I think what is happening is more devices are getting connected. It's as simple as that. And you can call that city, smart city. But for example, wastewater plants come under the purview of a city. Now, wastewater plants are fairly connected. Many of these devices are connected. What if your wastewater plant gets attacked or goes down? Like, imagine your sewage water is not flowing anymore. How would that feel if you woke up in the morning and that doesn't work, right? That would be a nightmare for houses. You go to the city, all these traffic signals, they are connected. They're connected to a central thing, the central controller. They're able to remotely fix them, debug them. What if some of them fail or some of them get attacked? So concept of smart city that I'm talking about is not the futuristic one that has been spouted off for the last 20 years on how the world will change. It will change, but not the way that people have been saying, but it's much more simpler. All these devices, whether it's traffic lights, whether it's these sensors, there are sensors in all across the city, whether it's a wastewater plant, all of them are connected. And how do you really understand what is there in the environment? How do you protect them? Similar problems, protection, visibility, operational metrics. How do you get all of that information? That's what we are talking about here, right? And that is already happening. And I think the difference between then and now is there is a lot more focus on critical infrastructure today. Maybe one reason is connectivity has risen. If you go back 10, or when I started this strategy project at Symantec, there was very limited connectivity in many verticals. So, if you have only 5% connectivity, does it really matter? Yes, it matters, but how much? How much is it in the list of priority? But when you reach a third threshold, 25, 30, 35, 40%, it starts to get important, because now significant percentage of your devices are talking on the network and you've got to provide visibility. So I think that's the difference that has happened. The futuristic vision of smart cities, I don't want to say how long that will take, but the present reality is there are devices getting connected. They have been connected. Connectivity has risen. There are benefits to connectivity. And with that comes all of these requirements, visibility, cybersecurity management. That's what we're solving.
You mentioned, catering to clients or customers in healthcare, and then you talked about smart city. Both are, more, I would say, regulation centric or more focused on regulating. And when you mentioned HIPAA, I almost got PTSD from my last job where I worked at Epic and we had to deal with HIPAA, and I know how complicated that could be. So what was your experience like dealing with two sectors which are, highly regulated in a way?
Yeah, so the good news is, and we are working with other sectors regulated. Manufacturing, there are some regulations there. University is not regulated, but it's fine. But our thing is we touch the data, the device data, and so there's not much around that. Like the regulations focus on patient data, for example. The regulations focus on certain kinds of like PII data in smart cities, for example. The regulations focus on certain kinds of confidential information in manufacturing. And so we are not touching that. We are really touching device data, one. So it's simpler. And the architecture we have built where we are not sending all the data to the cloud. We are only sending certain kinds of device data to the cloud helps that. And then when there is a very critical kind of environment where, sort of some customers will never ever say allow you to transmit anything to the cloud. Maybe they will. I won't say never ever. There's always a possibility, but they will not allow you to transmit any meaningful data, at least today, to the cloud. So we also have the on-premise version where we could do everything on-prem so that they don't have to do anything on the cloud. So because of this architectural capabilities, because of the way we actually work with the system, and because regulations focus more on the PHI, PII, PCI data, it doesn't directly impact us in that. So we have been able to, with our architecture, with what we are solving, not be really impacted. But I would say because these are more regulated environments, there is a far more scrutiny on the technology, on the product, and you have to have an enterprise grade product, which is something we have built. So that's how we have managed to as well. Like there has to be certain levels of quality, certain levels of assurance that you have to provide in these verticals, which is something we have been able to do.
You mentioned that you got started with Asimily because you were writing the strategy paper. So when you decided that, okay, I'm going to start this myself and I see this big opportunity, what were those initial days? How did you bring together the team, the founding team that can go and actually work on this? Like, what was
Yeah.
your process then?
Yeah, it was pretty challenging. When you leave a large company where you're running the business and then all of a sudden you're all by yourself and there's nobody around you, it's a little challenging. But, the initial steps, of course, is I was lucky that, I had built some core advisors, some relationships who could end up becoming, for example, I, I, I say that, one of the ex-CEOs of Symantec, Mike Brown, I call him like he's an advisor to the company. He's also an investor. I say, you are our first co-founder. Through my co-founder. He's not a co-founder in the per se, but he was one of the first ones who say, spoke to me about it and said it's a good idea, you should go do it, even gave me a check. So I called him my co-founder. One of our investors, Ashmeet, he became our first check. He took a bet. I didn't have anything. It was me and some slides, and he took a bet on me. Purely at that point, what else? No product. So Ashmeet, who runs engineering capital, he became like I would almost call Mike and Ashmeet, Mike Brown and Ashmeet Sidana co-founders. So I think I got the backing of people either through my previous relationships who believed in me, or fortunately, one of the good things that has happened is we ran into Ashmeet, and so we have been able to. We got a little bit of, I would say, good fortune at the beginning, and then I was able to reach out into my network. I brought in, Hitesh, whom I had, Hitesh Nama, one of our first guys to join, who I had studied with at Rutgers, and he's been with us ever since. He's still there. And then we brought in some other people between me and Hitesh, some other people, and then we managed to expand the network from there. So since then we have built a very strong leadership team who have come mostly a lot from Symantec and then from other areas. So initially it's a struggle, but I was fortunate to have some advisors, some people I fortunately ran into, and then using my network as well.
I'm curious, how did you get your first customer? Because when you work in big companies, what happens is there's always a whole big sales system, that's working for you in a way. Right? Your job, like as a product builder, ends at, maybe supplying all the information to marketing and sales so that they can pitch customers. How did you get your first customer?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to remember how we got them. I think because because I had been in the industry, because I had been doing IoT, I do basically knew a few people. That helped. I was able to reach out to some partners and some people in the industry, which is how I collected because between Symantec and Asimily there was a break because I wanted to take a clean break before I go start something. And so there was a few months, and then I started Asimily. But then I had built these relationships. I could reach out and get feedback. And when I got feedback from some of these people, they said, it's a good idea. Why don't you come back to us when you have a product, when you have something that you can show us? And so it took us a little bit of time to get there. But once we had it, I could go back to some of these people and show them. Now, it was not easy at the beginning because, healthcare has a very high bar. All our initial discussions are in healthcare. There's a very high bar. They don't, a lot of healthcare doesn't just buy, it's not like general enterprise. They don't buy half baked products. They want a more sophisticated product, even in the first round. So it was a little more challenging. It took us a couple of iterations to get there. But, the product had and still has some very core differentiators in it, which is unique and differentiated from the rest of the market. And so that allowed us to get some of those initial customers. And then we were able to improve the quality to a point where it was enterprise grade. And so obviously there's always a grind, there's always some details, but we were able to, through the contacts I had built, through the quality we had built, and through the differentiators that we built at the beginning, and we have continued to evolve and still persist, we were able to land our initial customers.
How does the sales process look today? Like when you compare that to like what is your process of like
The very first
reaching
sale was
customers?
me. It was me, and me. But now, obviously, we have that was like when I first did the very first customer. But now, obviously, we have a full-fledged sales team. We have channel team. We have marketing team. We have solution engineers now, and we have partners. Now it's a very different kind of motion. We have partners referring us. We are also the number one rated Gartner vendor in the thing that helps. So people sometimes reach out internally. We are constantly doing customer feedback, and sometimes we have some very good, strong, loyal customers. They refer us. So now our sales process is different. We are channel first. So a lot of our things come through our channel, and we want to be channel first. We want to encourage the channel, but we also obviously have grown. So at least in healthcare, a lot of people know us. We get recognized. In non-healthcare, we do have a channel ecosystem in place. So between our sales channel, our existing relationships that we have built and credibility that we have built, that's what's driving many of the leads. So right now it's a more formal, defined sales momentum, whereas the very first sale was completely ad hoc. It was me through and on the very first sale with some of our engineers, of course.
One more question related to sales. When you're talking to like prospective customers or clients, who are the decision makers usually? Whether it's either healthcare or smart cities, like who's the decision maker? Like for example, like if you're selling cloud, there are two types of decision makers. Right, one is like the CIO who's making a top-down decision, but there are also like developers who are making a
Yeah.
bottom-up decision of just buying a cloud that they want to. Like
Yeah.
in your case, like who's that role that is actually making the decision of buying it?
So it does depend, I think, but I would say 80% of the time it's the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, could be, or somebody in that area, like CISO, CIO, somebody in that area who really takes care of the IT and the cybersecurity in the space. But beyond that, there is some dependency on the vertical. The healthcare, it could be the chief clinical officer, the biomed. There's a 20%. Then in the smart cities, there could be somebody who manages the operations. Manufacturer, it could be somebody who manages the operations. So there is some nuance to every vertical, but I would say if you ask me what's the common thread across all of them, it's the CISO.
Got it. So when I look at Asimily, like I think of it as a security company, but security is such a broad term, right? Like it's much more, nuanced, and you can categorize security itself as an industry into different parts. Can you give an idea of like how do you see sort of like who's capturing what value and sort of the layers in this industry, and where do you position like Asimily in that?
Yeah, so I would say, we are focused more on the device related, like I said, IoT, IoT, OT. So security has different layers. There are some which is like data security and then network security and email security. So we are focused on the non IT side. So in the non IT side, it's a different kind of. So one, I'll separate out, make two kinds of like dimensions. One is I'll separate out the traditional security, but like I said, whether it's all kinds, network, endpoint, DLP, email gateway, all of those focus on the IT side. Now you can apply them on the OT side, but they're not built for these kind of devices. Now, when you look at the IoT, OT, IOMT devices in these verticals, there is a different kind of value chain there. There are like the part suppliers who effectively make different components. There are the full device suppliers. For example, somebody who provides a traffic light, somebody who provides the ultrasound, somebody who provides like a SCADA controller. Those are those suppliers. There are the system integrators, because these devices are all different. You buy one device from one manufacturer, you buy the server from completely different, and you buy the router from a third. So somebody has to put the entire network together. So there are system integrators. There are people who manage and maintain, because unlike the world of IT, there's so much heterogeneity. Who's going to maintain? And these devices run for 10 to 15 years. So there is an entire maintenance layer that sits on top of it. And then there is a IT, infrastructure, networking, cybersecurity. All of those are overlays on top of it, on top of this layer, right? So we effectively are coming in after these systems have been connected, right, from that perspective. And so we fall in that, IT, networking, cybersecurity, even maintenance, because there are some metrics we provide that actually will help with maintenance. So that is where we fit in the entire place. And so a lot of what is being done in these industries is manual, where they're manually collecting this data, manually going and figuring out what to do. And our value proposition fundamentally is to automate a lot of which is done, bring them to a similar state of capability as what you have today on the IT side. And that's where we at Asimily see ourselves in the value picture. Some of our partners do provide maintenance, for example, for hospitals, and they leverage us to kind of provide some level of automation and add some extra services that they probably haven't done today. And in some other cases, we are an overlay on the IT and networking. Because if you have set up the infrastructure and the infrastructure is not working, one of our capabilities is to figure out where there are bottlenecks in the network infrastructure on these medical IoT IT side, IoT and IoMT side. So we are the overlay on top of the network, but before that, there is a component manufacturer, the hardware, the system integrator, and then comes where Asimily sits in the value chain.
I mean, you mentioned being number one in Gartner, and obviously Gartner does a lot of competitive analysis and makes their own decision. But how do you think about competition and sort of try to differentiate Asimily from the rest of the companies that are trying to do sort of similar stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, there are players in this space. There are two parts to it. One, I feel like the space itself, like while people say, everybody's doing asset and anomaly, I feel, first of all, there's a lot more innovation to be done in the space. We are launching two completely net new modules now, which are going to be around, configuration control and something else, which I'll talk about, which is pretty much about to get released, and something else which is coming end of the year, which will be the first of its kind in the industry. So I feel like where the industry is I would say 50-60% of where it needs to be there. And what eventually needs to happen is a much broader, wider set of capabilities than what exists. And I actually see, when I started Assembly, all people wanted was visibility. Give me visibility, visibility. Visibility is still a big problem. But now people are asking for more. Like people are asking for, like we built some very core capabilities around vulnerability management, which I'll talk about, which is a differentiator. But people now, like last few years, they have started to recognize that, appreciate that. And so it's like a Maslow's hierarchy. They are actually asking for more and more with every passing year. So, and they want to manage all the devices because you can't use IT devices. They want to have similar parity. So there's a lot of capabilities to be built. So there's one level of differentiation, which is innovation. And I think this is the kind of space like AI where the winners will be decided not in the 2-3 year time frame, in a 10-year time frame, 12-year time frame, because the innovations will play out over time. And as customers evolve, you will end up picking platforms that are more capable, more mature, and provide and solve the problem holistically rather than piecemeal. The other piece is where we are. So one is breadth of capabilities, which we are continuing to build in an innovative way. The other place is really depth. So for example, whether it is inventory, passive is one thing, but we have done a ton of work around active, where the devices can take active for IoT, OT. Vulnerability management, we have some core differentiators around how do you find out you have a vulnerability. Yes, everything is vulnerable in the space of IoMT, IoT, OT. But which ones can be taken advantage of by the attacker for that device in that environment? So it's very contextual to the environment you're in. And then how do you mitigate it if there's no patch? If all you're going to do is microsegment every device, it could take you 10 years to do that. But how do you do it in a fast, efficient manner that is not going to consume all your resources and not get you anywhere? And while we allow microsegmentation and so on, there are some unique things we do around mitigation and remediation, which is very unique to our platform, which we're continuing to build. And there are some things we do around incident response, because how do you collect data? How do you analyze the incident? Everybody can tell you there's an anomaly, but what do you do next? How do you go back and play out what happened before the attack happened? So there are some things we have developed which are depth of capabilities, which is unique, differentiated, which is how we win a lot. But depth of capabilities and I think continuous innovation in this industry is what's going to determine the winner. And so we are continuously keeping our eye on the ball. We realize the product game is still only halfway there, and the winners will be decided in the next 5-10 years as the industry continues to mature, as more capabilities are being asked by customers.
I mean, what one of the things that you sort of imply is that security itself as a category, or even like just IoT or the device space, is such a huge space. Like if you have to look at some white spaces and say, hey, this is a white space that no one is trying to attack or a new founder who's interested in security and trying to start a new company? Like, is there any white space that exists, that is out there, that you would suggest they look into?
It's hard for me to say because, I'm so focused on this. But then if there was a white space, I go to RSA and there are already tech companies attacking. So, like for a few minutes ago, you would have said, Gen AI is there, people are adopting it. What if Gen AI starts to misbehave? Now I see 5 companies are doing Gen AI security and compliance. So, I probably this question is probably better suited to a VC who probably is looking at all spaces and saying there is a gap here, there's a gap there. But I do think, because, there is so much new products and technologies that are already coming in, new adoptions coming in, and these technologies continue to interact. For example, we ourselves are continuing to innovate in this space with new offerings, which by standalone could have become a small startup by itself, but we're launching it as new modules because we think there's a lot of evolution happening in terms of connectivity, in terms of things. And so in our space, in this IoT, IoMT, OT, we think there are a lot of areas where it need evolution and we'll continue to innovate. So I don't want to list out all the roadmap items, but there's a lot of evolution happening. But beyond this space, I think there is a lot of things happening in AI. I think that opens up a ton of opportunity in security. Gen AI security is just one aspect of it. There's an entire suite around data loss prevention around that. What if that starts leaking data? There's an entire suite of sandboxing around that. How do you make sure it only does what's expected to do? So I think that'll open up a ton of opportunities for sure. And I think the companies that I saw, at least recently, they're still scratching the surface. So there's going to be a ton of opportunity around security there. And then there'll be something new that'll come next year, and that'll open up a Pandora box. So, so that's my view. I'm not basically giving a perfect answer, but there's so much ambiguity here, so I can't be certain.
I mean, one follow-up to that is, everyone is talking about Gen AI, and there are a lot more sort of new tools that came up. I'm curious, like, not just as a business of using AI, but are you using Gen AI in any ways to just improve your own startup's productivity, or like, how are you using Gen AI just as an individual or company?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we are using, already using Gen AI. We actually have some partnerships with some of the larger companies who are releasing Gen AI. So we have some partnerships there. So we are using it for our own internal productivity. We actually adopted some form of AI long before for productivity, by the way. We for some of our research, we built our own NLP kind of algorithm to improve our research abilities, because we do research on every vulnerability and how do you have some level of automation and then you combine it with the manual stuff to go make it faster. So we already have been using it. So Gen AI we have used now a little more to improve our productivity, DevOps processes, our own internal research purposes. But beyond that, we are starting to we have been always using AI in the product, even though we haven't really created buzz around it. It's always been there, whether it's anomaly, vulnerability management, some in our asset detection. So as Gen AI comes in, it's just for us an evolution of the AI, obviously a big evolution. And so why we are introducing it not only in productivity, in our engineering productivity, but we are also we have some usages in our product as well. Right? So it's both in
any specific products or like companies that you're using specifically from that you can mention?
Yeah, so right now, the companies we are partnering with are we have the big companies, like we have a deep partnership with Google. We are doing some work with Microsoft. So those kind of things that you hear in the news, we are also using internally and testing and doing it for just some of our own internal productivity purposes. And then not everything can be done for our own. We can't just use it as it is. So we never feed them with any customer data or anything like that, because that's a strict no. Using it for our own productivity. And then we have continue to evolve as Gen AI has evolved. We are continuing to evolve our own algorithms, because now there's more scope to do it and leverage some of that. But partnership wise, we are leveraging some of the bigger, more established AI models to improve our productivity, to go faster. But that's for internal productivity purposes.
And is the productive gain meaningful for you guys, or because there's so much? I'm asking this question because there's so much hype in the news you generally see. So I want to get an understanding from someone who's actually using it.
It's a good question. And I would say if you ask me this question in 3 to 6 months, I'll give you a more concrete answer. Because, you're right. There's a lot of hype in it. So how much more are we improving by? Because we are also paying for some of this. And so the question we have asked internally is, we are paying for this, some of this. Is it really improving us? Is it like 5% for all the work we are doing? Is it not really? It's just a hype, or is it truly making us significantly better? And so we said, let's try it out. So we have been running this, and let's try it for another 2-3 quarters, and we'll get an answer on how much better we are and how much faster we can move. So I don't have a real quantifiable answer right now, but I would know for certain. It looks promising, but we don't know what we don't know. So we got to see whether it works for us or not. That we'll know in a couple of quarters.
So we are almost at the end of the conversation. So I want to ask a couple of questions, quick questions that I ask pretty much all my guests. So the first question is, I think you're what you are consuming, right? Like, so what you consume is what you become. So what are you consuming these days? What are you reading? What are you listening to?
So good question. So I do listen to some general podcasts like Masters of Scale. Sometimes I read the Andreessen Horowitz. As the company is growing, I'm trying to understand. I'm talking to people in the industry who have grown bigger companies and how have they scaled their companies. So my view is, general and some more on go-to-market. There are some go-to-market books I've been referred. So I'm trying to understand like how the company scales, what happens when the company grows bigger, larger, because we are operating internationally, we are growing with people, we're growing every year. This year we hope to grow significantly. So what happens when the company scales? So and there are some podcasts online. And then a lot of my thinking also comes from talking to mentors and people. That's how I see I learn fastest. So not necessarily reading or listening, but going and talking to people in the industry. And then I'm part of some forums, CEO forums, and because we have investors, they introduce us to other people as well.
So who are, I mean, I think you probably already mentioned it, but I'll ask again, who are your mentors that shaped your career?
Many if you ask my entire career, obviously there are too many to name, but I would say specifically from Asimily, like I said, Asimily doesn't exist without Mike Brown and Ashwin Siddhana. So thanks to them. We don't get here without them. But over the course of my career, there have been many other people who have got me here. So, so I think there's a lot of people thanks to whom I'm here. I wouldn't be half quarter of where we have been able to do without these mentors. So I think it's thanks to and also to the people you work with, right? Your team members and colleagues.
One last question. What do you know about starting a company that you wish you knew when you started Asimily?
That it's going to be harder and take longer than you anticipated.
Yeah, that's pretty much, I think every founder says the same.
Yes, exactly. And you realize that truly what it means when you run a company.
Yeah. And this was a really fun chat. Shankar, thanks for coming on the show and sharing the story of Asimily.
Yeah, thank you, Nataraj, for having me. Thank you so much.